Hello there and welcome to what I painted this month, August and September 2017. That's right, 2 months crammed into one. Mainly because in August all I painted was this unit of trolls, and I've done so many videos talking about painting trolls. This is the third horde of them that I have now. So I thought people wouldn't find that very interesting to hear me talking about the same unit over and over again. However, as you can see, a couple more things were added in September, including Harambe, the troll Bruiser. And you can see on this initial image that the miniature, from Thunderchild Miniatures by the way, slightly smaller than your average troll, but I think he looks about the right height when he's perched on that cork and his weapon held aloft as well. Just lacks a little bit in the width department compared to a troll. But I think the fact that it is such a legendary deceased gorilla will sufficiently inspire nearby trolls to explain the slight size discrepancy anyway. So that's who we're going to start with. This is a one-piece resin miniature. It has a little base built into it as well, which you can just about see, kind of. But with the snow over it, it hides it pretty well, I think. Less orange than most of the Goblin army, but I wanted this one to stand out a little bit. The flesh is very similar in painting style to the regular trolls, but I had to do something a little bit different because there is all that fur as well. So I started off the same way I do with the trolls, with a very, very bright green, and then shade it down with multiple layers of Agrax Earthshade. And to make the fur stand out from the skin, I applied less layers to the skin and more to the fur. At some point during this process, the fur did have a slight dry brush of white over it as well, but you can't really see that now because there are so many layers of wash over it. The metal, all very, very basic, just base coat, wash, and then you can see on the armour plates and the shoulder pads and such, there is a bit of silver highlight going on. Tiny little eyes in yellow, nothing too fancy at all. If we look at the back, you can see the orange cloak, which is done the same way I do the orange on all the goblins, which is just orange, and then Reekland flesh shade, which stops it being quite so vibrant, makes it a bit more dull, which I find a bit more fitting. So there is some orange representation going on this miniature. This is going to act as my second troll Bruiser for my Goblin army. So looking forward to trying out a list with 2 of them in. Moving on to a Goblin Flaget. Now the other models that I have that I could use as flagets tend to be mounted on flea bags, which makes them more expensive in points. So depending what I want to use them for at any given time, I do want the option of having one on foot as well. So I decided to knock this thing together from spare parts, since I've got quite a few goblin bodies left over, and this standard was sitting in the box as well. I can't remember exactly which unit it came with. The 2 notable things here, I would say, it shows you that even with a very, 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 very simple paint job, because most of this model is just base coat and wash, it makes it look a lot better if you just choose one thing and pick it out in fine detail. And in this instance I've gone for the teeth, where you can see I've gone in there with a very, very thin brush and done the tiny little bone-coloured lines there. And I think it's Mr. Remington Steele that always says it's all about bases, faces and shields, and I've got at least one of those covered here with the face. Face is a very important part of the miniature. If the rest of the paint job is just going to be very, very simple, just pick one thing to focus on and put a tiny bit more time into that, and hopefully that will draw the eye. You can see this smiley face painted in blood on the big standard or gong or whatever it's supposed to be. And the 2 reasons for this: one, I just think it's kind of funny, and it's something a goblin would do, just have a smiley face in blood. But also, when I go to tournaments, I'm often having to bypass the box that says, this army contains freehand work. There are some tournaments that have a sheet that you fill in, self-critiquing your painting basically, to save judges having to go around and see exactly who's got conversions in the army, who's got consistent basing and so on. You just put it all down yourself. And I always have to bypass the freehand section, but no longer, because that smiley face, believe it or not, is purely freehand. So that's going to send me zooming up the leaderboard in those tournaments that use such a painting scoring system. And the other side there, not too much to look at. But the eyes and the teeth, I think, make these models, because the bodies are actually really bad. Not in terms of the painting, even though there's really nothing to the painting on them, it's just the models themselves, you can't really tell what's what, it's just really awful detail. But the faces are actually quite good. Next we move on to the trolls. Now the back rank of that unit we saw in the first picture was not painted this month, which is why it was just stuck in the background there to show you what it's going to look like on the table as a full unit. but this is the unit that I actually painted during August. Just these 2 trolls on their own, which I've discovered from using them on the tabletop is not the best way of running them at all, in my opinion. I think you're much better off with hordes. So as far as the painting goes, I'll just whiz through the usual stuff on these models, because the most interesting stuff was in the modelling and the converting. So the painting, orange, Recon Flesh shade, and then the skin, bright green, and then layers of Agrax Earthshade. There you go. Then picked out things like teeth, the metals, very simple, the stone, the rock at the top of his weapon there, just grey, black wash, and then some white dry brushing going on there. Blood effects, of course, blood for the blood god. So, into the conversions. Let's start off with this guy. So, normally, the weapon he has in his right hand is not supposed to be held that high. So, pretty much all the arms, I think, are heavily converted on these trolls, because you only get so many options with the poses. So, because I want to run quite a few trolls, then I want to make them look significantly different. So, to reposition the arms, you generally have to slice off bits of that restic, because they do kind of plug together a bit. So you've got to smooth them down, and then I've pinned them in place as well with either 1 or 2 pins, depending on how firm the connection is, and then I've gone in there with green stuff afterwards to make them have more natural looking armpits instead of just big gaps there. And in a couple of places tried to replicate how the muscle is supposed to look, because you're not supposed to see that part of the arm normally. So as far as physically chopping the arms up and repositioning them that way, that is the extent of it with this model. But there was also a lot of hot water manipulation, which is very possible with Restic. The right arm was bent more than it's supposed to be, and the left arm has more significant work on it. It's been bent upwards a bit, and also the fingers are all out normally on this model. So, as you can see, I wanted him to be making that rude gesture with the middle finger. So, in hot water, bent all the other fingers down, and then painstakingly held them in place, and then cooled it off. I had to do it multiple times, because as it was heating up, it was bending the arm into a position I didn't want. And then when I dunked that back in, it was putting all the fingers back into the original position, so it was a delicate balance to find. And in the end, I added a bit of super glue underneath the fingers as well, just to make sure they're not going to pop back up. And I think that looks quite tasty. Over onto this guy, and you can see what's going on with him. He's cut off his own hand. If you've been following my troll progress at all, you would have seen that one of my trolls previously was cutting into his own wrist, and this guy has gone a step further and actually chopped the whole thing off. So, the arm that I've used for the stump is the arm that's supposed to go with the really big weapon that's being held in 2 hands, because the other hand is actually attached to the weapon. And that hand there was a spare hand that I chopped off my other troll that I used as a bruiser in the past, because I wanted to put those big spiky balls on the end of his wrists. So he was missing a hand, so I used that hand, just rested it on the ground, and I put some balls of green stuff onto the stumps, so it looks slightly like there's bones there that he's cut through, which I then painted in bone, and you can see it's just a slightly different colour. It's hard to tell because of all the blood, obviously. And I've repositioned the right arm as well, slightly. It's not supposed to have that kind of outward angle. It's usually much more close to his body. So that was done the same way I described earlier, with chopping bits off, then pinning. I think this was a double pinner situation here. And then green stuff into the crevices. Plenty of blood splattered all over the place. As you'd expect, if someone's hand gets chopped off, it's going to create a significant amount of blood. What did it look like? It had just been freshly cut off. So the whole area isn't completely soaked, but the weapon and the ground beneath the wound are heavily saturated. And you could imagine that would only get worse until it probably grows back, because trolls do regenerate. From above here you can see a bit more of the shininess of the blood effects, and you can see a bit better the 2 attempts at bones sticking out of the stump there, they're just little green stuff blobs. And the final image here, you can see them from the back. Not quite so much blood visible from this side. I do like the colour contrast though, with the green that gets quite dark and then the orange. For some reason it works, in my eyes at least. I don't know what the general public think, but people do tend to like the look of this army. A few tufts of grass on there after the snow effect. And there's the first image again, with that unit of trolls looking as they would on the table, with their little buddies behind them that I painted a few months ago. And just in case anyone's been living under a rock and hasn't watched any of my previous Goblin videos, when you're applying snow effect like that, if you want to do it exactly the same way I've done, which many people don't, Then I PVA the snow powder, but I mix in white paint with the PVA, because otherwise it can go a bit yellowy over time. And we don't want that, do we? So there we go, not much done for 2 months really. I haven't done a vast amount of painting. I've still got lots of Caradron Overlords on my painting table. Haven't been too motivated to paint them recently, because I haven't been paying that much attention to Age of Sigmar at the moment. I've got some grot tanks that still need finishing off. One of them's not got that much more to do on it, I suppose. And I've also got a Goblin War Trombone right here, which needs painting up soon, because I'm sure I'm going to play Kings of War. I don't think there were many videos at all during September actually, there may have been just the one battle report. I do generally guarantee at least a battle report every month though, so I'm sure I'm going to get one of those in soon. Should be playing Kings of War, and I'm going to a Dead Zone tournament next weekend as well, so there'll be a video on that. Live shows, I haven't really been feeling it lately, but we'll see what happens. I'm sure we'll get back to those at some point. Anyway, that's all for this month and the last, so catch you next time folks. Ta-ta!